So, hi, I'm Charlotte Kibble from the Adult Ed Committee of Congregation Shir Hadash. We have with us our wonderful support, Kristen on the Congregation Shir Hadash box, and our committee chair, Julie Ogawa. And I'm delighted to welcome everybody and to also welcome our speaker, Marie Knecht. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name.
Like connect the dots.
Knecht.
Connect.
Marie was brought to us by Mara Beckerman Snyderman, who's a member of our congregation and of my Havurah. And she told me that her connection to Marie was exercise, music, and Judaism. And that Marie had been her exercise instructor and had been inspired by Richard Simmons, and that Marie and her husband play musical instruments, and also discovered that Marie has an amazing story about her own family and connection to the history that got captured in the book and movie about Schindler's List. So we're going to hear a lot more from Marie about her story and about how all of those events came to be. And we're very happy to be able to have this on Yom HaShoah, the Day of Remembrance, a story of loss, but also a story of hope. So, and before I hand over to Marie, what I want to request is that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat to me under my box. You can go to the bottom of the screen to find the chat. And when it's question time, I will pose any of those questions to Marie. And at that time, you can also use the react button to raise your hand, and we'll call on you to unmute if you want to make a comment or a question at that time as well. So we will have question time at the end. And now I will hand over to Marie.
All right, so good afternoon, congregation, Shir Hadash, and family and friends. My name is Marie Knecht, and I'm the daughter of Leopold and Ludmila Pfefferberg-Page. And my father was the one who met Thomas Keneally in our retail store in Beverly Hills in October of 1980. But before I go into their story, I want to tell you a little bit about me. I grew up with my brother and, of course, my parents, and I graduated Santa Monica College and got an Associate of Arts degree in Child Development and taught preschool and kindergarten for about a year. And then my father wasn't feeling well and asked me to come and work in the store, and which I did. We also had the store for a few more years, and then we sold the business and we turned our business into wholesale, and we called ourselves Borsa Bella. And we imported handbags from Italy, and they were these little square handbags with metal handles. You might remember some of those. And then we decided to go into the applique business and called ourselves LPH Imports. And we imported appliques from China and we put them on clothes. In 1995, I joined the Los Angeles Symphonic Winds, playing euphonium, which is like a baby tuba, and percussion and trumpet. And I met my husband, Jeffrey Knecht, who plays clarinet. And we currently still play with that group until this day. In 2001, my father sadly passed away, and I liquidated the business. My brother, Fred, went on to teach at Westchester High School, and my sister-in-law went to teach at Palms Middle School. And my good friend, Richard Simmons, he inspired me to become a fitness professional. And I got certified as a personal trainer and group exercise instructor. And for the past 20 years, I've been teaching fitness classes at 24 Hour Fitness, Hillcrest Country Club. In 2013, I opened up my own company, MPK Fitness, and I teach in person and on Zoom. And I've been teaching fitness classes at several senior living communities in the Los Angeles and Beverly Hills areas. Sadly, my mom passed away in December of 2020. And in August of 2022, I was asked by the Sousa Mendez Foundation to give my a presentation about my parents and their Holocaust story. And so I did that, and my band director from the LA Winds, Stephen Piazza, was very impressed with the presentation, and he asked me to speak at 2 concerts last year, and which I did. And so then I went on to speak at Valley Beth Shalom and here with you today. So as I was growing up, my father and my mother always told us a story about how Oskar and Emilie Schindler saved their lives during the Holocaust. And so now going back to October of 1980, this is our handbag store at 149 South Beverly Drive. And so a gentleman came into the store and he was looking for a briefcase, a repair on his briefcase. And my brother Fred was helping him. And so we introduced him to my father. And my father was trying to repair his briefcase, but ended up selling him a brand new briefcase. And so my father asked Mr. Keneally, while we were waiting for the credit card to be approved in those days, my father asked Mr. Keneally where he was from and what he did for a living. And he said that he was from Australia and that he was an author and he was at a local bookstore in Beverly Hills signing his book. And my father told him, you know, I tell the greatest story of humanity, man to man, about a Nazi German
Thank you.
who risked his life during the Holocaust to save myself, my father, my wife, Mila, and 1,200 other men and women and children during the Holocaust. Mr. Keneally, this is a story for you. So my father took Mr. Keneally. Here's a picture of my dad at the store. And so my father took Mr. Keneally to the back office and showed him documents about Oskar Schindler and testimonies from the Schindler Jews. And he looked at the papers and he said to my father, Mr. Page, I don't think I can write a story about the Holocaust. And my father said, give me 3 good reasons why you can't write this story. And he said, well, I'm too young, I'm not a Jew, and I'm studying to become a priest. And my father said, those are the 3 best reasons why you should write this story. Well, don't worry, we'll travel to Europe and Israel and the United States and interview the Schindler survivors, and you'll have your story. And that's what they did. So now I want to go to the very beginning. My father was born as Leopold Pfefferberg and lived in Krakow, Poland, with his father, David, his mother, Mina, and his sister, Pauline. My father graduated high school. He went on to the University of Krakow and received his master's degree in physical education and philosophy. He enjoyed playing sports with the Maccabee Sports Club, and he was part of the national Polish ski team. Here's a picture of his mother on the far right corner, and he had a very large family, and his sister Pauline. Now in 1935, my father joined the Polish army, and he graduated in 1938 at the top of his class as lieutenant. When the war broke out in 1939, my father was called to the front to fight the Germans, and sadly his captain was killed. Many of the soldiers were killed. My father was shot in the leg, and another soldier was shot in the hand. So the 2 of them, went to a nearby hospital and town, and my father told the doctors there that he was a physical education teacher and knew a lot about anatomy. And so the doctor gave him a special note saying that he can leave the hospital and go out and get more wounded soldiers and bring them back. Eventually, the Germans took over that town and the hospital, and the officers became prisoners of war. And they were given the opportunity to go to a prison in the Soviet Union or a prison in Germany. And so my father picked the prison in Germany. So on the train to Germany, the train just happened to stop in my father's hometown. And so my father was thinking, he was very smart. I have this note, I'm going to show it to the guard and see if I can go. So he took the note and says, look, this note says I can leave. So the guard on the train looks at the note, says, okay, go ahead and go. So my father slowly walks away from the train. Once he's out of sight, he hops on a trolley car and went home. But he couldn't stay with his family. He had to stay with friends. So now I want to talk about my mother. My mother was born as Ludmila Levinson, and she was born in Chisinau, Romania. And at 1 year old, she moved to Lodz, Poland with her father Siegfried and her mother Maria. Now, her father Siegfried was a surgeon, and her mother was a doctor of dermatology. And at the bottom here is her grandmother, what's her name? Sophia Ilsov. And the boy in the back behind Siegfried is Siegfried's brother, and sadly, I don't know his name. So my mother, she also graduated high school, and her father sadly passed away in 1934. And my mother was just starting the University of Vienna to study medicine. And my mother told me, this is the war just started, and she was in a cafe, and the Germans were marching through the town, and the people that lived there were throwing flowers at the German soldiers as they were walking through. And so my mom immediately returned home. And she was at home one day, and there was a knock on the door, and there were two German soldiers there. And they said that her mother was being deported to Krakow, Poland, and to leave all the jewelry on the kitchen table. And so my mother told me that her mother gave her a small bundle, said, go throw this bundle in the toilet. And so that's what my mother did. And so they were taken by a regular passenger train to Krakow. Once they got to Krakow, a gentleman from the Jewish agency that was there, that was registering everybody, asked them if they had a place to stay. And they said no. They were very upset. And he said, don't worry, I'll take you to my home and we'll find you a place to stay. And he picked them up with a droshka. A droshka was a carriage and a horse. And he took them to his home, and he introduced them to Professor Leopold Pfefferberg. And my mother fell in love with my father and got married in July of 1940. Now, my father, he was visiting his mother one day, and there was a knock on the door. And his mother looked through the peephole, and she said, oh my God, Nazi Gestapo is at the door. And so my father, being, a prisoner of war, and he escaped. So he went to the kitchen and took out his pistol and hid behind the kitchen door. And he said to his mom, open the door and see what he wants. He introduced himself as Oskar Schindler. And he had purchased an apartment in Krakow, and he was looking for the expertise of Mina Pfefferberg to do interior decorating on the apartment that he had just purchased. And so my father heard him talking, very nice to his mom, and he came out from the kitchen and introduced himself. And Mr. Schindler was very interested in finding out how he can get some of those silk shirts my father was wearing. And my father said, I can get you anything you want in the black market. And that's how their friendship began. And that's how it lasted until the day that Oskar died in 1974. So going back to the story, there was an order from the German officials that all Jews had to leave their apartments and move into the Krakow ghetto. And this is a picture of the ghetto, and I believe it might be in the area where my father stayed with my mother. You had to be an essential worker to be in the ghetto. And so my father tried to get documents for his parents and for his sister and brother-in-law, Pauline's husband, Edward, and my mother's mother. But he was only able to get documents for himself and for my mother. So his parents, sister, and brother-in-law, Edward, and my mother's mother went to Sarno, Poland. Later, my father heard that his parents were killed in a concentration camp. His sister and brother-in-law went to Warsaw, and they were living on false Iranian papers and were denounced and sent to a Polish prison and shot. And my mother's mother, Maria, she eventually went to Tarnow, Poland, and she was working in a hospital, and the Germans took over that town and hospital and killed everybody there. My mother was able, the document that she was able to work for Julius Modrich. Now, Julius Modrich had a sewing factory, and he moved that factory inside the ghetto. So my mother was sewing uniforms from the front. Now, my father, he got a document saying that he can leave the ghetto, remove his Jewish armband, hop on a bicycle, and do black market for Oskar Schindler. So there was an order from the German, before I go into this. So this is Oskar Schindler's factory, and it's called Deutsche Enamelware Fabrik, and he called it Amalia for short. And this is a picture of Oskar Schindler in the middle with his workers that worked there. This factory made pots and pans. And Oskar Schindler hired a lot of the Jews from the ghetto to work there. And people were saying that, whoever worked for Schindler, they were never hurt. They were given food and clothing. And so there was an order from the German officials saying that they were going to liquidate the ghetto and deport all the Jews there to various concentration camps. And my father heard that people were trying to escape through the sewers. And so he decided to go, toward the sewers, but he heard that the Germans found out about that. And the Germans were killing people that they found in the sewer. So my father started to go back to the apartment. And so when my father was going back to the apartment, he heard a lot of commotion and dogs barking. So he started to move the bundles out of the sidewalks, the suitcases that people had left. And so this German officer stopped him and he said, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I have an order to move these suitcases and bundles out of the thoroughfare." And my father stood up and he saluted like this, like from being in the army. And so the German officials kind of laughed it off and just kept going. And so my father slowly walked away. And once he returned back to the apartment, my mother wasn't there. And he asked around, "Where's Mila?" And they called my mother Mila for short. And someone said that she was one of the last groups to go to Ploshov labor camp. Here's a picture of Ploshov labor camp, and it was also eventually called a concentration camp later on. And I found this in my father's papers. And Ploshov was built on two Jewish cemeteries. And the Germans knocked down all the tombstones. I heard from one of the Schindler testimonies that the Germans removed the gold teeth and burned the bodies. They took the tombstones and made a road into Ploshov. You also had to be an essential worker to be in Ploshov. And so thankfully, Julius Modrix moved his factory into Ploshov, and my mother was able to continue sewing uniforms for the camp. Now, my father, he didn't have a special document, and they didn't need a physical education teacher in Ploshov, and so they were going to send my father to Auschwitz. And my father said, "Look, I can be a welder. My hands are, I'm a young person. My hands are young. I can work as a welder in the camp garage or a metal pot polisher." So they put him to work in the camp garage as a welder. And the welder, thank God there was a Jew there that helped my father learn how to weld because he had no idea how to weld. And they had to wear these special goggles. And if you wore the special goggles, you can walk around the camp freely. So this is Amon Get. Amon Get was the commandant, and he was a horrible person. He would stand on his balcony of the villa where he was staying and take that rifle and shoot at the prisoners below if they weren't walking fast enough, if they were working too slow, or just for the joy of killing. He also had two large dogs that he had trained to attack on command. He's a horrible person. Now, Oskar Schindler, all his workers now are in Ploshov, and so he has nobody to make the pots and pans in his factory. So he decided to become friends with Ahmed Get, and he bribed him with cognac, with alcohol and gifts and lavish parties to win his friendship. And he was granted that wish to get his workers to come back to Amalia to make the pots and pans. And so anyway, so the workers came back and they were saying, like I said before, that whoever worked for Oskar Schindler, they were treated well. They had food, they had clothing, and they were just there to work. So Oskar Schindler decided to make barracks in his factory. And so that the workers wouldn't have to go back to Plaszow every night and then go back to Amalia the next day. So he had barracks there in his place. So my mother was at Julius Modric at work one day, and she heard a fellow worker saying that the Soviet army was coming and they were going to liquidate Plaszow and send all the Jews, the prisoners, to Auschwitz. And that Oskar Schindler was making a list, and he was going to move his factory to Brünitz, Czechoslovakia. And so my mother, when she heard that, she went to my father and she said, Poldik, go get us on the list. So there were two lists. The first list had 801 men on the list, and my father was 173 on the list, and my mother was 195, and there were 297 women on her list. My father told me that there was two trains. The train that had the men got stopped in Gross-Rosen for 7 days. And when my father got there, they had to remove all of their clothes and stand in the center of the camp, completely naked in the dead of winter, while the Germans took their sweet times taking roll call. And once the men arrived in the men's barracks, they had to sit like dominoes with their legs wide open. And they were there for 7 horrible days. I have to take a drink, sorry. Okay. So my mother, she told me that her train got sidetracked to to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And she told me when she got off the train, she said that the sky was red and it looked like rain was falling from the sky, but it wasn't rain, it was ash. And their group was sent to the building on the left. They had to remove all of their clothes, and their hair was cut very short, and they were put into this room with these metal nozzles hanging from the ceiling, and they didn't know what to expect. And eventually water came out from the nozzles. And my mom knew at that point they were not going to die that day. And as the group was going to the women's barracks, my mother noticed a whole nother group of men, women, and children going to a building on the right. And that's where the chimneys were. Here's a picture of Gross-Rosen I found in my father's documents. And sorry, this is a picture of Auschwitz with Thomas Keneally, and when my father and him traveled Europe to get the information for the book. When the men finally arrived in Brünitz, they asked Oskar Schindler, where are the women? And at first he didn't know, and finally found out that the women went to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And he sent somebody from his office to bribe the commandant in Auschwitz with diamonds and alcohol and gifts. And I believe the 300 women that were able to leave Auschwitz were the only 300 women that were able to leave that place. And once the women arrived in Brünitz, Oskar Schindler was waiting for them at the train station. And he said, don't worry now, there's hot soup and bread for you on the factory floor. And so I want to go off the story a little bit. Now, Emilie Schindler, she wasn't much in the story in Krakow. I think she visited him a couple of times there. He was married. They stayed married. He was a womanizer, so he had a lot of girlfriends. But when Oskar moved the factory to Brünitz, she came and helped him with the Jews, the Schindler Jews. There was a train that came from Goslar. It was like a quarry of Auschwitz. And someone came to Emily and said, there's a train at this train station, and there's some people in it. We can hear people. So she went there, and the doors were frozen shut. So she asked my father and another gentleman to come and use the welding torches to unfreeze the doors. And they found 126 people in that train, and 16 had died of being frozen to death. Now, Oskar Schindler wasn't there that day, and so Emily called him and said, this is what happened, and there's these people that are still alive. I'd like to bring them to the factory and nurse them back to health. And he said, okay. Now, Oskar Schindler had purchased a plot next to a Catholic church in Brno, Czechoslovakia, and he buried the dead there. And Rabbi Lebertov gave the prayer for the dead. On the eve of liberation, Oskar brought all his workers to the factory floor and he gave a beautiful speech. And he gave each of one of his workers a roll of fabric so they can start their lives again. The Schindler Jews also wrote a note just in case he got stopped by the Soviet army, saying what a wonderful thing he did by saving 1,300 men and women and children during the Holocaust. And one of the Schindler Jews gave up 2 gold crowns and they made a mold and a ring, a gold ring, and then the inscription inside the ring in Hebrew said, "Whomever saves a single life saves the world entire." And that's from the Talmud. And so at 5 minutes after 12, Oskar and Emilie Schindler left for the American zone. Now, my parents stayed in Brnitz for about a month just to, get stronger. The camp was liberated like 2 days after Oskar left. And so my parents traveled on to Budapest and met up with a friend from Krakow, and his name was Arthur Rand. And together they traveled to the American zone to Munich. And here's a picture of my mother in the white blouse and Oskar Schindler standing next to her and many friends from the camp. My father got a job at the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, and his job was to get children back in the schools, and he was able to get 1,700 kids back into the school. Once my parents received their papers to go to the United States, they traveled by the Marine Perch to New York. And while they were waiting to register, someone said, you might want to think about changing your name. And so, excuse me. And so my father told me that he went to a telephone booth and picked up the yellow pages and changed his name to Page. And so now they were called Leopold and Ludmila Page. And so Arthur came to New York ahead of my parents, and he was able to learn how to repair handbags. And so my father, because he didn't speak the language English, he couldn't teach physical education. So they met up again and they opened up a handbag and luggage repair shop in Lower Manhattan called Rand and Page. And my mother got a job at a department store picking up dresses for them from the floor and was helping my father in the store. So Arthur and his wife Vera left New York, and in I think it was like 1948, and went to Los Angeles, California. And he kept calling my parents and saying, "Paul, Mila, you have to come to Los Angeles, and because in the morning you can go snow skiing in the San Bernardino Mountains. In the afternoon you can go to the Pacific Ocean and swim." So in 1950, my father and my mother and my brother Fred came to Los Angeles, California. And so Arthur thought, well, let's open up another handbag repair shop in downtown Los Angeles. And my father said, no, I want to open up my own handbag store in the city of Beverly Hills, because that's where the writers and the producers are. And I want to tell the story about Oskar Schindler to everybody that will listen. And I want to make him a household name. So my father had, he met somebody in his store. This is Oskar Schindler, but anyway, he met a customer in a store, and he met a producer from MGM. And MGM was going to make the movie of the Oskar Schindler story, and Howard Koch had done a screenplay, but nothing really happened to it. So it kind of just stayed put. My father and my mother, and 11 other founders started the 1939 Club. And that was for a group of Holocaust survivors from Poland or anybody that survived the Holocaust to join this group and have party and teach the world about the Holocaust. And then my father became a Boy Scout leader, and a commissioner, was honored by the city of Los Angeles. So going back now this is a picture of my father and Oskar Schindler in Paris in 1963. This is in 1968 at the Los Angeles International Airport. My mother is holding the flowers, and Oskar Schindler is with the red tie. And my father is right there next to him. And the lady on the far right is Lola Krumholtz and her son Stephen Krumholtz, who I'm really good friends with now. Tosha Lieberman, I remember her from when she used to go to Lake Arrowhead with us. And we used to call her teacher because she would always give us some kind of homework to do while we were on vacation. In the back is Leon Leeson, and he was one of the youngest Schindler survivors, and his wife Liz, his brother David, and there I am at 12 years old in the red dress. And I believe my brother Fred took the photo. Here's a picture of my mother and Oskar Schindler. This is also in 1968. We had two stores on South Beverly Drive. This is at 191 South Beverly Drive. And of course, you know the other one that I showed you earlier. And so now going back to 1982, so Thomas Keneally did decide to write the book. It was called at first Schindler's Ark, but Simon and Schuster didn't like that name, so they changed the name to Schindler's List. It won the Booker Award Prize, and and then Universal got the rights to make the movie. And in 1993, they went on location to Krakow to start the movie. Now, it took 10 years before, like from 82 to 93, it took 10 years to make that movie. And Steven Spielberg wasn't really quite ready to make it. And my father couldn't wait. He was very impatient. So he would call the office and he would tell Steven Spielberg, stop making movies about aliens and dinosaurs and make a movie that's going to win you an Oscar. He would always tell Steven an Oscar for an Oscar. So finally in 1993, Steven Spielberg had the right mindset and he made that movie on location in Krakow. My father was a consultant on the picture, and when they went to Krakow, my mother was very upset because when she saw Ralph Fiennes, who played Amon Get, she was so frightened because he looked just like him. And when she saw the actors in the German uniforms, she was very upset and frightened, and it just brought back a lot of memories. So in 1994, the movie Schindler's List came out and it won 7 Academy Awards. Here's a picture of my father and Thomas Keneally and Steven Spielberg. And here's a picture that I wanted to include. There's my mom and Steven Spielberg. And then here's another picture of myself and my father and my brother Fred with the Schindler's List poster. This is our warehouse called Borsabella in 1994. And here's a picture of our family. This is an older picture. It's my parents in the background. There's my husband Jeffrey and myself, and my brother is behind my mother, and my sister-in-law Judy and Samantha, and that's my niece and my nephew Matthew. This is from 1998, and they're all grown up now, and Matthew is married now to Whitney, and Samantha is married to Teddy, and Matthew has a son and another baby on the way. So going on, so my father did tell his story to the world. My father also spoke at many temples, his story. Steven Spielberg, he started the USC Shoah Foundation, and where 56,000 testimonies were given by Holocaust survivors. And last month in March, my husband and I went to USC, and they had the medallion event where they honored the 56,000 Holocaust survivors that gave their testimonies, and Steven Spielberg was honored there, and it was a very nice event. And in the meantime, since I've been speaking, I met several Schindler List second generation children. I met a Robert Don, and his mother was Rosa Laffer, number 139. I met a Randy Biederman and her husband, Mark Biederman. sadly, Mark passed away, but his father, Hirsch Biederman, was number 3 on Schindler's List. And Mark and Randy wrote a book called Schindler Listed. Mark's father, before they were deported, buried some coins in the backyard, and the story is about those coins. And several other families from Schindler's List and the Schindler survivors, and I want to make it my goal to reach out and find the rest of them, and so we can get together either on Zoom and just have a conversation. So I have some messages from my family. My father's message says, in the dark, this is for future generations. So in the darkest moments of your life, you must think positively that you will overcome. You must have hope that you will survive. The strength is in yourself. My mother's message says, never be prejudiced against any group of people. Always believe in the goodness of human nature. My brother's message, being a longtime Boy Scout, what I learned from that experience was to never forget, be trustworthy, loyal, and kind. And what I learned from my parents was to be able to accomplish life goals, be kind and respectful to others, always believe in myself, and never give up. Sadly, my brother just passed away in March, 6 days after his 74th birthday, and he will be missed by all of us, the entire family. And so I just wanted to mention that here. And I want to thank all of you for coming today and listening to my story. And I will hand it over to Charla. And if you want to send any messages to her to ask me any questions, I can definitely do that. So I will stop the share on this so we can all go back to, I guess, Zoom, right? All right, so here we are. Hello, everybody.
Thank you so much, Marie. There's some things you said that will stay in my mind like an Oscar for an Oscar.
Yes.
And those 3 reasons to write the book. So people who would like to make a comment or ask a question, you could use the react section at the bottom of the screen and to raise your hand, and then I'll call on you to unmute, or you can put a question in the chat.
Anybody have any questions? Hi, Jessica. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see all of you. Thank you for coming.
Well, we're a small enough group that if somebody wants to just unmute and make a comment, okay, go ahead, Judy, and then I'll call on Linda.
Marie, thank you so much for sharing your story. And it's so important that we hear from the next generation, and that you make sure that more people know the story. And congratulations on your father's efforts to be able to bring this story to everyone in the world. I'm still processing everything you've told us. I just had a very small question. You mentioned in your mother's story that her mother told her to put jewels in the toilet as the Nazis were knocking on the door.
Well,
did you learn more about that? And was
my mother, when they came in and they were being deported, they said for my mother to put her jewelry and money on the table. She took a small bundle as they were gathering all that stuff, and she told my mother, take this bundle and throw it in the toilet, because she didn't want to give anything to them.
Okay, so it wasn't for like future retrieval.
No, because
anyway, it was just don't.
God knows where it is now, you know. So
yeah. Okay, that was a very minor detail that I just was curious about. Thank you.
Linda, you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Marie, for Thank you, Marie, for telling a story that needed to be told for a long time.
Thank you.
Most of you don't know that her father gave me a job when I was without work, and he was a very kind, hardworking man, a very powerful, strong man. So maybe that's what he learned in the camps, and he came out strong and very, very positive. And that's what brought him his successes, an amazing family like he has. And I was very fortunate to have the pleasure of knowing Marie for all these years. Thank you, Marie.
You're welcome, Linda. Thank you. Hi, Franny. You're muted, Franny. Unmute.
See if I can help with that.
Franny, you want us to talk?
Unmute. I just found it. It just popped up. Yeah, that was so good. I had no idea that you had so much detail. That was wonderful. I would love to get a copy of your talk. Is it possible to get either a written copy or a copy of the Zoom? Was it recorded?
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you later.
Yeah, we all
Sounds great. Oh my gosh.
The Franny Rand is Arthur Rand is her father. And my father and her father was best friends. They met in Krakow.
Krakow. I think maybe
And
even in
Franny
the
told me
Polish Army.
that his father wanted to marry Pauline, my father's sister. I wish he would have, because then maybe she would still be alive. But you know, things happen for a reason.
I see Bonnie's hand is up.
Bonnie.
Hi, thank you so much for your story for a couple of reasons. My aunt's second husband was in Ploshkow, but he was not on Schindler's List. The commandant was way worse than you even mentioned, because I know some of the stories from my uncle. But he said, and what you just proved, is he said it was Schindler's wife who was nice, that he was a mean person, but that Emily was the one that was kind to people. So it was nice to get a different perspective.
Yeah, Oskar Schindler was he spent all of his money that he raised making the pots and pans to also, you know, to help the Jews with food and shelter and just to keeping them alive. Also, the factory, I didn't mention this in the presentation, the factory, the Schindler factory in Krakow is now a museum. And my parents and many of the Holocaust survivors are on the windows displayed with their photos there. And also in Brinlitz, that factory was owned by the Lobier family. And the Lobier family was a textile family, a textile business. And during the war, the Germans took it over and they had to leave. And now the grandson, Daniel Lobier, has taken it back. They're rebuilt. They just put a brand new roof on the original building there, and they're going to make a museum, and they want to open it up to the world in 2025. And so exciting, and I hope to be able to travel to Europe during that time to see that grand opening of Brinlitz and the factory there. It's called the ARKS Foundation, ARKS Foundation. I believe it's .com or .org. I'm really not sure. I can't remember.
Well, and I think Wendy, the person next to Wendy, I'm spacing out your name.
Okay,
Sure,
Marty. Yeah.
Marty, that's right.
Hi. Well, thank you for this very memorable presentation. I just wanted to clarify what you said, because it sounded like Oskar Schindler came to America and then to California. And I never knew that. And so I Googled it while you were talking, and it doesn't indicate that he was ever in the United States.
Yeah, he came to the in 1968 he came here, because I live here in my apartment building, and he was in apartment number 6. So I remember that in the LAX, and he was also here at Temple Beth Am. He was honored for saving all those people during the Holocaust. So he was honored by Temple Beth Am with Joel Pressman, the father, back in 1968. And so that was a big to-do here for him.
So who was it who convinced your father and so on to move to California?
That was Franny Rand's father and mother. They moved to they came to New York and taught my father how to do handbag repair. And then they left for Los Angeles and kept calling my parents and telling them to come to Los Angeles, and eventually they did. And it was Franny's father, Fran Rand, appear up in the red blouse. Her father and mother persuaded my parents to come, and they did.
Okay, that's the part that I lost. I thought you were talking about Schindler, and obviously not. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Judy, did you have another question?
Judy, can you unmute?
You're muted, Judy.
I'm
yeah.
good. Okay, thank you. I guess I feel very fortunate that we have 3 people on the call that are children of folks who were survivors. And I've thought a lot about the second generation in terms of what your responsibility is and what it was like to be raised by folks who had such a variety of experiences as survivors, you know, and what they chose to talk about and share. And Marie, it sounds like, you know, there was an abundance of emotional health, I guess I could glean from your family in terms of being able to really quite openly talk about their story with you. But like, I recently watched this movie called The Fighter, and it was I thought a very well done portrait of, from a second generation person's perspective, of how hard it was to understand like where his parent had come from, having gone through the Holocaust, and the balance of like wanting to protect your children, keep them safe, be cautious with them, as well as love them, you know, unconditionally. So I just wonder if there's anything you 3 of you might be willing to offer to the group in terms of how you see your parents because of their Holocaust survivor experience, and what the impact has been on you of that.
When I was growing up, my parents, you know, talked about it a lot, and but I was doing my own thing, so I didn't really start getting into talking about their story until really August of 2022. This was my father's thing. He was like, he was working all the time. We did go on vacations together, but my father was so involved with the 1939 club. The 1939 club, I didn't say that in my presentation, but they started the UCLA Holocaust Chair at UCLA. My father had spoken at Chapman University. Chapman is in Orange County, and they have a huge Holocaust study program there. And Marilyn Herron is in charge of that program. And when I did the Sousa Mendez Foundation presentation on Zoom, one of the other people on the panel was David Crow, and he had written another story about Oskar Schindler, and he donated all his documents to the library at Chapman University. So if anybody goes down there, it's very must see. The Holocaust Museum, Los Angeles. My father was part of the committee there from ground zero, building that location by the Pan Pacific Park near the Grove in Los Angeles. And he was part of the committee that put together those 6 black pillars that honored the 6 million Jews that died during the Holocaust. And now they're expanding that Holocaust museum. So now it's now that I'm getting more involved with telling their story more than I ever was before, because I was in music, I was skiing, you know, had my own life. That was my dad's little thing. And now that they're gone, and now my brother is gone, I really need to tell the story. And now, especially what's going on in our world right now, needs to be heard, and especially the younger generation, the kids. The kids don't understand. They need to know, and I need to get into the schools and speak to them as soon as possible.
Well, I did get a message, Marie, from Joan Picken, one of our participants, offering condolences about your brother. And
Okay.
I do want to acknowledge, you know, that this must be still a very tender time, and
Yeah.
And you are doing honor to his memory as well, I think, in your telling.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's been difficult, but I'm trying to get by, you know, trying to remember him with photos. I have a great picture of him from his wedding with Judy, and it's on my desk. And I do go to the cemetery and visit, and it's really good therapy for me when I go and visit my mom and dad there, and I tell them my whole life, what's going on, and now my brother, and it's very good therapy for me.
Is there anyone else who wanted to respond to Judy's question?
Julie has a hand up raised.
Oh, go, Julie.
So,
Thank you. May your brother's memory be a blessing. I'm so appreciative of the story that you shared, and it's reminding me of the importance of our tradition of telling stories so the next generation will tell the story. You know, we just got through Pesach, and we're still telling those stories. There was something you said that brought up a memory for me, and it had to do with the graves that were built over, and you know, people were removed, and you know, just horrible. I can't even think about what that was like, and the tombstones being used to create something else. It's just sickening to me, and that must have happened in many places. I had the experience, my husband's mother survived Auschwitz, and he lost most of his family members. So it took a long time for her to tell her story. But then it was almost like she said it was a second liberation for her to share her story with the family. But it kind of didn't go beyond the family. For her, that was enough. And maybe what was implied was that we would take on the responsibility to tell her story, which we're trying to do. Not so easy, but what you were saying about the cemetery reminded me of how somebody's story is so big for them in their narrative, and how many other people have similar stories. And sometimes it's hard to take all of that in. But we visited a family, or it was a Jewish cemetery in a village in Hungary, way outside of Budapest. And that's where my husband's grandfather was buried. But that cemetery, the tombstones were all knocked down, and it was just dead. Nobody took care of it. And shrubs just growing all over. And in some ways, it was kind of protected from what you were just describing, because no one could find it. But it was just painful to see how it wasn't taken care of.
I'm sorry, when I went to Poland for the first time in 1972, my parents, we went to Lodz, Poland, and the cemetery there, and that's where my mother's grandfather and grandmother were buried. And so everything was a disarray. The tombstone, the headstone was all broken. So we got a hold of the people that worked there, and we paid money and fixed it up. And we added, and Sigrid, of course, her father was buried there. So we added my mother's name, Marie, because we never found the body, of course. So she's there, but we haven't been there since. And it's so funny that you say that, because I just found the business card to the cemetery. So I want to get in touch with them, because I do want to go to Poland next year to see Brynlitz and Daniel Lobeer and the places that my parents grew up and things like that. I would definitely want to make that trip next year.
Thank you again for what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Jessica.
Some of those cemeteries are really, oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that not coincidentally, but I had never seen the movie Schindler's List, and I watched it last night, knowing that I was going to watch this today. And bizarrely, I didn't even make the connection that it was Holocaust Remembrance Day, so much of a good Jew that I am, which I think I am, but I totally forgot. And I was on Facebook and I saw the messages after I saw the movie. I was like, kind of like everything happens for a reason. And maybe that was one of the reasons why after 31 years, I watched that movie. So it's really fresh on my mind. I had a very uneven sleep last night.
Both
And
of my, yeah, both of my parents were portrayed in that movie.
with you talking about this today, I realized that that man was your father and that the woman was your mother. And and at the end, I saw the credit that said that your dad was a consultant right up there at the top. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I wanted to say, first of all, I had not seen this movie and heard about it for literally for decades. And realized when I watched last night how important is a cliche, that word, like to say important was, I wonder how many of you actually saw the movie too, and what a significant thing. If Steven Spielberg stopped doing stuff right then and there, to me, he would just be an absolute legend without ever having to do anything else. So I wonder how your parents reacted to the movie, how that was a huge thing. It was good. And the last scene, the scene in the cemetery, where in the real scene when they go to his grave, and he's got a crucifix on the front and Hebrew letters written along the bottom of his tombstone, and it was just so I'll never forget it. Like, just so moving and so beautiful. It's a dumb question to ask if you feel like that movie did your parents' legacy justice. Of course it did, but I just wanted to hear.
It did, and because of that movie, so many Holocaust survivors never told their story until that movie came out. Now, that gentleman that I met a few months ago, Robert Dunn, he was at a synagogue in Chicago. His mother had passed away already, and the rabbi, this was during Yom Kippur service, and the rabbi was talking about, this was in 1990, maybe 8, and the rabbi was talking about Schindler, Oskar Schindler, and Schindler's List, and his father leaned over to him and he says, "Bob, your mother was on that list." And his mom never said anything during the time that he was growing up that she was on the list. And so now he's researching his mother's story and he's writing a book. And Randy Biederman and her husband Mark wrote that book, another book, about searching for his father's, who was on Schindler's List, number 3, Hirsch Biederman. He buried coins in his backyard. And so Mark and Randy wrote a book called, I forgot what it was called now. But anyway, Schindler Listed. And so my father told this story and he felt great because now the Holocaust survivors, most of them came out, and 56,000 Holocaust testimonies are now on the USC Shoah Foundation. You can go onto their website and definitely listen to everybody's story, including my parents. Yes, he was very pleased with the movie that came out.
I had meant to mention earlier that my grandmother went to university in Krakow and lost her father and sister because she left just before the war kicked in. And I remember when the Schindler's List movie came out, I wanted to see it, but I was scared to see it. And I eventually went to see it with my mother because her mother had that history. And after seeing that movie, my mother and I cried together and connected to her mother's history in a way which we hadn't before. So I think it's touched many of us at different times in important ways.
When I went to see the movie the very first time with some friends, and it was very moving for me. It was very difficult for me to watch, but I watched it, and 2 of my friends walked out of the movie because it was just too much for them to handle. And my other friend, she said to me, "Marie, this is going to win an Oscar." And sure enough, it did. And Steven got his Oscar for Oscar, for sure. And then when I met Steven Spielberg on March 25th at USC for the medallion event, I met him for the very first time, and he said that my parents were an inspiration to him, and that made me feel really good. It was a pleasure to meet him. Anybody else have any more questions? Thank you very much for coming, everybody.
Marie, I just have one more question. I'm gonna I work very closely with a nonprofit organization that provides teacher training around very difficult histories, such as the Holocaust, genocide in general. I wonder if you've had any connection with Facing History and Ourselves.
This is all new for me. I just
Okay.
started doing this in August of 2022, and I just would like to continue telling my parents' Holocaust story, and to colleges, to schools, especially now. We need that. The people
Yes,
know.
your
People
voices are very much needed in the classroom to provide personal testimony. And so Charla has shared your email with me, and I would love to follow up and put you in touch with them. They work closely actually with the Shoah Foundation to prepare a lot of educational materials around Schindler's List. And so I'm sure, you are a natural person that they would want to work with if you're open to being more involved in the classroom.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
Charlotte, you're muted.
Saying I'm seeing a number of thank yous in the chat for sharing your personal story.
If you have anything that was written, please email that to me, the copy of the chat for me. That'd be great. Thank you.
And
anybody else? Oh, sure. I guess that's it, huh?
And I'm glad we've
So
recorded this, because I know people are going to want to watch the recording. Was there one other person who wanted to say something? Fran?
Yeah, I know. That's what I was asking about. So it is recorded. It's possible to watch it again, or to let one of our friends, family members see it.
Kristen, our staff person who's on the congregation screen, is going to download the recording and make it available.
The video on?
We'll probably also upload it on our congregation's adult ed site.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you coming and joining us for the presentation. If you need to get in touch with me, you can always find me on my website, MPKFitness.com. My number's there. And if you need to reach out, oh, Jessica knows it.
And now, if you need to work out, she's the woman.
I appreciate it.
Is it
So
MKF?
Jessica's in my Zoom class on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and Sunday mornings. I also have a Tai Chi class on Sundays at 10 Pacific time, and you're more than welcome to come and join us. It's a lot of fun, and you don't have to drive anywhere. It's all on Zoom.
So is it mks.com, Marie?
I'm sorry.
Jeffrey's
there
putting
it
in
is.
the chat. Thank you for putting it in the chat, so people can always go to that site if they want to.
If
All
I
right.
had to drive, I'd be in big trouble. I'm in New York.
You guys are funny. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate your time spending it with me this afternoon.
And thank you for
Thank you
joining
very
us
much,
from Southern
Marie.
California.
Welcome. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Lots
everybody.
of love. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Charla, Mara, and Julie, for bringing this.
And thank you, Mara, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Franny, we'll talk later. And Jessica, I'll see you in a
Sure
couple.
will. Thank you. That was
Thank you,
wonderful.
Marie.
Congratulations.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Should I end it? Because if I end it, I'll leave you guys. Let me stop the recording. That I could do. How do I do that? I don't know how to do that. Oh, here it is. Okay.